Hello students, today we look at the fourth great master in our series on great masters. We have already seen Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. The fourth amongst them is Walter Gropius. In case of Walter Gropius, we cannot see him alone, we have to see him along with the development of the Bauhaus School. So let us go back to this and recap the four great masters, and in one key word, what was their contribution. Wright gave us propositions concerning architecture. He was responsible very strongly for the growth of organic architecture. Then there was Corbusier, who gave us the new points or the points of a new architecture. There was Mies van der Rohe, who gave us elements concerning modern architecture and his contribution towards the large span and the tall span building, use of glass and steel in modern architecture. And then there was Gropius, whose primary contribution was towards architectural pedagogy, the teaching of architecture. Walter Gropius, or Walter Adolf Gropius, one of the most influential figures in modern architecture and design. His contributions are foundational in shaping the modern architectural movement, and his legacy spans not only architectural practice but also the education and theory of architecture. Of these four great masters, if anyone can be contributed to giving the strongest impetus to the growth of modern architectural education, it is Walter Gropius. His most important contribution was the design of the Bauhaus School building, but not only the building, the very philosophy behind the Bauhaus School was very, very important, and thus it became the most influential school of architecture, design and art in the 20th century. Bauhaus had a very significant design influence on modern architecture both globally and even in India, and Gropius had said that architects, painters, sculptors are all craftsmen in the original sense of the word. He was born in 1883, educated in the College of Technology in Berlin. He trained and worked under the German architect Peter Behrens, and then he partnered with Adolf Meyer in 1910. He established the Bauhaus School of Architecture in Weimar, Germany in 1919, served as the director of Bauhaus from 1919 to 1928, and after the Nazis took over in Germany, he moved over to the USA and founded the Architects Collaborative in 1945 in Cambridge. And it was a famous quote of Walter Gropius that specialists are the people who always repeat the same mistakes. He founded the Bauhaus School in Germany, and the Bauhaus School, like I said, not only the building itself was a very important model to study modernism or the international style. All the components of modernism or the international style can be found in this one building designed by Walter Gropius, but the school itself was foundational for integrating fine arts, craft and architecture into a single education and design philosophy, the motto being architecture and technology, a new unity. The curriculum was a combination of practical workshop and theoretical study. The Bauhaus itself is the beginning and shows the beginning and growth deeply connected with the rise of modernism and the international style. Now, why was it important? Why was Bauhaus such an important school? And why was its contribution so important to modern architecture? We have to go back a little bit to look at the post-industrial revolution, what had happened. There was a great exhibition held in 1851. Now here I am recapping some of the slides that I have already shown you earlier to give you the context behind it. A colossal quantity of products were displayed in this exhibition, but the quality of these products was terrible. Now there was poor craftsmanship and there was excessive ornamentation in these products. Now ornamentation by itself is not bad. In fact, a lot of products like this were being handmade in home guilds earlier before the Industrial Revolution, and they were of a very high quality and very high standard, and of course they were very expensive products because each one was a work of a craftsman and they were sold at high prices. Only very few people could afford to buy it. But with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, these products being mass produced in factories could now be bought by the rising middle class, and this fed the material aspirations of the middle classes, and more things were available than in previous centuries and more people could have them. This was the new era and the start of the consumer culture. Also, because of there were a lot of advantages of mechanization. It saved time, expense and labor. A lot of products were made which were to be used within the home, and these were labor saving devices like washing and ironing of clothes, etc. And as a result of this huge saving in time, many of the women started joining the labor force, and thus there was the rise of the double income households, rising incomes, the middle class, rising aspirations, and there were goods available in great numbers to feed their aspiration. But there was also the extinction of the medieval craftsman, because the appearance of the product was now not governed by the craftsman but by the uneducated manufacturer, who in general was not a man of craft. Therefore, thousands of cheap articles could be produced at the same time and much lower cost than earlier. In fact, several hundreds could be at the cost of one handmade object now. So this breathless space, there was no time to refine the product, there was no quality control, and thus it led to poor quality products. Now this poor quality occurred because of industrial growth and invention of machines is a very superficial answer, because earlier also there had been machines. Even the potter's wheel is a machine. So also the handloom and the printer's press, they were all machines. And progress is essential. If we look at the handloom itself, how it has progressed over time into machine looms. If we look at a simple device like a calculator, progress leading to evolution of devices is a logical process from simple mechanical devices to more modern machines or more modern devices. Like the evolution of the mobile phones from 1973 to 2020. Like the evolution in the cars. The progress has led to cars evolving from what they were in the earlier stages to what they are today. Or even from simple mechanical devices like a sundial to the modern smartwatch, or even in buildings. So here we have, because of materials changing in function, building technology changing, and the changing understanding of aesthetics has led to this tremendous change in buildings. So what we have here in Art Nouveau in the early stages, in the later stages, early stages of the international style, to late modernism or high-tech architecture, to something like deconstructivism, and to the fantastic forms generated or being designed by architects like Santiago Calatrava. To summarize, there was mass production post the industrial revolution which ruined the aesthetic quality of the products, and after the industrial revolution this mass production was prioritized over craft, or quantity of product was more prioritized than craft itself. As a result of these products being mass produced, aesthetic quality was lost, and critics like John Ruskin, William Morris saw this as a decline of artistic integrity. Now then there was the rise of the arts and crafts movement, and as an anti-reaction to this, the arts and crafts movement both in UK, the US and in the form of Art Nouveau in Europe was a direct reaction against industrialization. There was emphasis on hand craftsmanship, traditional materials and aesthetic detailing, and it was opposed to machine made goods because that was thought to be soulless and inferior to handmade products. So it was a return back to handicraft or handmade goods. But Bauhaus wanted to reconcile mass production with aesthetic quality, and the thought was, because the machines have already come, installation happened, there is no turning back. Therefore, there is a requirement to bridge the gap between craft and industry. Machines and industrial production ought to be used to make these products, but not at the cost of aesthetics. Therefore, it was taught through the Bauhaus that beauty should emerge through the function, through standardization that came through factory production and through clarity in the product. For example, tubular chairs designed by Marcel Breuer, who was a part of the Bauhaus, or buildings, modular buildings designed, say for example by architects like Walter Gropius. To conclude, arts and crafts on one hand rejected the machine to protect aesthetics, but Bauhaus apparently had the correct understanding. Machines are here to stay. It is better to embrace the machine and to elevate the design by using the machine. So, we have, for example, here a product of Art Nouveau, an armchair which is going away from machine production towards handcraft, and this is a tubular chair by Marcel Breuer which is using industrial production technique and materials, modern materials to make a chair. Thus, industrial production was suited for straight and clean lines, precise shapes and unornamented surfaces. It was not suited for fine detailed work at that time. Industrial production was now irreversible from the 20th century. Man was now in tune with the new aesthetics given by the machine. Bauhaus aimed to use the machine so that we could restore the craftsman to his earlier position to designing appliances and products. Thus, the machine was to be used to make very fine products, many of these products that you see here, or even the rise of product designing, graphic designing. And here the Bauhaus objective was ideals of art meeting industry, and holistic education was to be provided in design involving art, architecture and industrial design all put together. Bauhaus was not rejecting the machine, was not rejecting the idea of mass production, but rather to use this machine to create the modern day aesthetic, the aesthetic that comes through the use of the machine and the use of standardization, modular construction, etc. So, Bauhaus shaped modern architectural education globally. It pioneered what we have today as the studio based interdisciplinary model of architectural education. It was foundational to design schools globally. It transformed architecture education by the hands-on workshop experience along with theoretical practice or theoretical subjects, and a new model which was interdisciplinary design education. This was the educational reform in architectural pedagogy brought by Bauhaus. It had a unique syllabi in which the first year was introductory classes in subjects like color theory and design principles, followed by more advanced technical courses, and this class structure has been adopted globally to teach architecture in architectural schools. Now, the foundation of modern architectural education was thus: systematic theoretical and practical research into formal, technical and economic fields to derive the form of an object from its natural functions and its limitations, forms that emerge from various methods of production and construction and modern materials, and such forms diverge from existing models, and thus they seem to be unfamiliar and surprising. So, many of the products that came out of Bauhaus were very different from the products that existed before them, and over time these forms, these objects that came out of Bauhaus have become our modern day products. So, Bauhaus brought about this change in architectural pedagogy in which design schools began to impart this integrated design approach which was based on form follows function. There was an emphasis on constant evolution of architects, designers and artists and their work, and also influenced the development of graphic design from the early 1920s. The aim of Walter Gropius and Bauhaus merges together to provide a more holistic approach to architectural education and design everything from the simplest utensil to the finished building. Everything is up for designing. Product designing, industrial design, architectural design or building design, all to be taught in integrated fashion and everything to be designed. Thus Gropius said, in response to the title The International Style, which was coined by which was coined by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson in 1932 in an exhibition in New York. His response was, the aim of the Bauhaus is not to propagate any kind of style, system, formula or fashion, but to exert a stimulating influence on planning. It had a unique approach in which to unify the principles of mass production with individual artistic vision, something that had gone missing after the Industrial Revolution. The artistic vision of the craftsman was out, only mass production was left. Bauhaus was the first attempt to bring them together again in the modern times, to combine aesthetics with everyday function, form and function working together. Thus, Bauhaus promoted functionalism, which we will study in the next presentation, and modernism, advocated form follows function and removal of unnecessary ornamentation, introduced clarity, clean geometry, use of industrial materials like glass, steel and concrete. Now you will say that this was already being done by Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. So please understand that chronologically we are speaking of the same time. The work of Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe happened parallelly with the rise of Bauhaus and the works of Walter Gropius. So this was a growing movement and a growing revolution in architecture in the early 20th century. There was an integration of industry and design that promoted fusion of industrial production with architectural form and planning. That means products could be standardized, machine made, mass produced in factories and then brought on site and assembled, and the standardized elements could bring about this regularity that we see in the facade, and we will see these principles that govern the international style, in which one of them is the regularity in design, which we will see in the presentation called styles and movements. They believed in mass production and standardized components to serve social needs efficiently. So for example, in the development of prefabricated housing, which was one of the very passion you can say in architecture, or a very important goal for Walter Gropius. Now post Bauhaus, after the Nazis took over and Bauhaus was effectively shut down 1933, Walter Gropius moved to United States and became a professor in the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and he transformed its architectural curriculum. Then he co-founded the Architects Collaborative. It was one of the first group practice architectural firms globally. He spread the ideals of European modernism to post-war American design. So we have these buildings that you see here. He designed the Harvard Graduate Center. This is another picture of the Harvard Graduate Center, and he also was a part of the team that designed the Pan Am, or what is called as the MetLife building today. He was also very much involved with urban planning and community housing contribution, and he championed social housing, and architecture should serve the collective good of the society. There should be rational, standardized and livable housing for workers and for communities. So we have prefabricated housing in Dessau Totten housing project, and this Siemens-Stad housing project again done by Gropius, and some of the ideas worked, some were not so successful. He also influenced later architects like Marcel Breuer, Philip Johnson and Impai, and his legacy continued in the international style, inspired generations of modernist designers. He helped change the way we think about architecture in our modern times. He believed buildings should be simple, functional and made of modern materials. And through Bauhaus, the new way of teaching architecture, combining theory with hands-on practice, still influences architecture the way it is being taught today. His work connects traditional craftsmanship with industrial production, and showed how design can improve our daily life, that there could be well designed products at every level in our daily life. F.L. Wright had said this famous quote about Gropius: "He is the first man who interpreted industrial revolution to us in terms of architecture, in terms of design, in terms of community planning. he constantly investigated the great potentialities of the industrial society. He showed us how to assimilate them to our ever changing needs. He was the one who taught that mechanization and individual freedom are not incompatible, they are compatible. Whereas in in arts and crafts movement, they wanted to go back away from the machine to handcraft. This was one movement that actually promoted the use of machines with proper artistic and aesthetic control. And thus we were able to come up with products all the way from simple products to buildings for our modern times. So though his buildings are important, but it is said that his major contribution is in reshaping architectural education and integration of art, architecture and industrial design. This is, for example, of product design, an armchair that was designed by Gropius, his contribution to art, architecture and industrial design. The aim, for example, industrial design is to merge art and industry, to produce functional and aesthetically pleasing objects which have simple geometric forms using industrial materials, and the core is form follows function with visually striking and practical designs. So modernism in a sense has its major roots in a very small German art school or architectural school which existed only for 14 years, from around 1919 to 1933. And in contemporary times, there are global traces of Bauhaus in every corner of art and in design of architecture, design or architecture. Very powerfully influential global vision. Contemporary graphic design, tubular chairs, all the way to glass and steel office buildings. To summarize, Bauhaus was founded in Weimar in 1919 and it was a studio-based interdisciplinary curriculum. Then there was the Bauhaus spread of Bauhaus influence in 1920s and 30s with architects like Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe and Marcel Breuer who refined the modernist principles. The key works that happened at the time was Bauhaus designed by Walter Gropius, Tugendhat by Mies van der Rohe and Fagus Factory again by Walter Gropius, with emphasis on function, rationality and minimalism. And there were many other works. There was the Barcelona Pavilion, we have talked about that, many other architects who were working parallelly at this time. Then but we are currently focusing on the architects who were directly linked with the Bauhaus movement. Then the international style emerges by Philip Johnson and Henry Russell Hitchcock coining the term international style in 1932, and architects like Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe and others were active at the time, all a part of the international style, all a part of what was called as Congrès International de Architecture Moderne, and this architecture, this international style architecture is defined by volume over mass, regularity and minimal ornamentation. Like I said, we will see this under the title Styles and Movements. Then the Bauhaus migration to the US with Walter Gropius going to Harvard GST, Mies going to IIT Illinois, Marcel Breuer joining Walter Gropius. Bauhaus ideals got embedded into American architectural education and then spread globally. 1945 to 1970, post-World War II modernism, where international style became mainstream under corporate modernism and institutional architecture, and architects which carried forward the Bauhaus ideals started multiplying with architects like Marcel Breuer, Philip Johnson, Naimpa, etc. And then there is the continuing legacy with studio-based architectural education existing even till today, functional design aesthetics and the modernism's adaptation into regional forms which would be called as critical regionalism or regional modernism. But there are many other styles and movements that arose as a result of the early stages of modernism, including late modernism, kind of an anti-reaction against modernism called postmodernism, many other subsets under these two categories, the rise of high-tech architecture, the rise of architecture like deconstructivism, metabolism. We will look at all these various styles and movements again under the category styles and movements. Thus, Walter Gropius said, architects, sculptors, painters must all return to the crafts for art is not a profession. There is no essential difference between the artist and the craftsman. The artist is the exalted craftsman. He made the Workbund exhibition, an industrial building that showcased modern construction and mass production, exposed steel framework, glass curtain walls, clean geometric lines, an early expression of modernist architecture. It represented his early thinking on industrial aesthetics and functional design, and was considered as a forerunner to the philosophy that would evolve in Bauhaus. There was an extensive use of glass in this particular building, and the transparency that you see in the Workwood Pavilion would later on appear in high-tech buildings like the 88 Wood Street building by Richard Rogers. The same transparency carried forward in late 20th century and even into the 21st century. Thus, Behrens, who had designed the AG turbine fabric, both Behrens and Gropius, who worked under Behrens, were interested in industrial architecture, but both had a different design philosophy. Whereas Behrens was focusing towards a sense of nobility in industrial architecture with the AEG building, versus Gropius, who wanted the exterior design that should reveal construction logic of the building. His mandate was to have artistic solutions for constructing industrial buildings. Even in these two buildings, this is the Fagus Factory and the AEG turbine and fabric, you find a difference in the way the building shed has been put, this particular building has been put together. This is the office of the Fagus Factory. You compare it with this, you find something amazing. Here is a massive masonry around it, and there is a glass panel in between, and then there is a kind of a classical order that you find in these columns here, and then they are these glass pane panels embedded in between them. Whereas in the Fagus factory, what Gropius does is he makes a central part of brick, and all around it is glass wrapped around the building, extensive glass, whereas the columns are, the glass is recessed and the columns are in front in AEG. In Fagus, the glass is dominating and the column supports that you see here are pushed back. The supports are, the brick piers are pushed back and the glass dominates, and this brick portion, whereas here there is a strong axial symmetry, here this brick front is actually placed asymmetrically in this this building of the Fagus factory. So there was a lot of very interesting comparison between this building of the AG turbine building and this part of the Fagus factory. So Gropius' design ideals were reflected in a lecture called Monumental Art in Industrial Construction that he gave in 1911, and he said train stations, department stores, factories can no longer be built like we used to make them in the previous decades, like we have seen earlier in presentations when we talked about eclectic style following the Industrial Revolution, where lot of historical architecture or styles were borrowed and put together in buildings for which there was no precedent. There were no train stations before, there were many of those building typologies had not existed. So he said now there was a need to evolve because of changing socio-cultural dynamics. The social aspect to architectural design, we need to improve conditions of our buildings, we have to provide increased daylight, fresh air, hygiene and greater worker and people satisfaction and increased production in industrial, in factories which were designed, which were also part of architectural design. And then these theories which he talked about have been reflected in the design of the Fagus factory. Coming to the Fagus factory, it is a complex of many buildings which are having varied functions like manufacturing, storage and offices. The important point is that he gave the entire complex the same exterior design aesthetic common to all these structures, and then there is clear functional zoning in manufacturing, storage, offices. The whole building is clearly divided into different functions which would later on follow in the design of the Bauhaus. The workspaces are efficient, the workspaces are adaptable, and they are flexible as you would find in Mises universal space. This block that you see here, the office of the Fagus Factory, is this block that I have marked in yellow. The office building is the most architecturally significant component of the Fagus Factory. It is 3-storied with a glass facade and having this brick entrance which is asymmetrically placed. RCC columns are inside the building. So, these brick pairs that you see here, you see that they have been pushed back in a sense to free the facade, and there is the fully glazed exterior corners that have been provided free from all structural elements. The exterior design is to improve the interior conditions while exposing the model construction techniques as a part of the architectural aesthetic of the building. Thus, it has an open floor plan, it has got an unobstructed layout to provide efficient workflow, it has got the Bauhaus principles of functionality, it has got abundant natural light, floor to ceiling windows that provide ample daylight in the workspace. Again, later on we will see that in Bauhaus where light and space are integrated together, there is an exposed structural elements, exposed steel beams and columns, use of industrial materials, and again the principle of Bauhaus is there is honesty in materials and construction. There is a minimalist aesthetic, he avoids unnecessary ornamentation, there are clean and geometric lines. The Bauhaus principle being that of minimalism, there is integration of art and industry, this industrial functionality and aesthetics in the building. This is the Bauhaus principle of unifying art, craft and technology. So, each component that you find in the Fagus Factory, right from the open floor plan to the integration of art and industry, there is a Bauhaus principle at work behind it, which will later on appear when Walter Gropius will design the Bauhaus and establish it in terms of its architectural pedagogy. These are some of the shots, pictures of Fagus shoe last factory. A shoe last actually is the frame that we make which is then used to make shoes. So, the wooden frame or from some other materials, the frame of the shoe is made in the form of the human foot, and then shoes are made using those frames. That is the shoe last. This is the picture of the canteen. So, you can see here how much natural light is flooding in, how much extensive use of glass has been made, how the interiors are devoid of all ornamentation. There is a kind of an industrial aesthetic within the building or even in the staircase, and the way the corner is turning here with glass and there is no structural support here. So, we will end with this and then we will move forward to the Bauhaus building itself in the next presentation. Thank you.